Uncle Mark.
Yes.
I don't really know what to do now. It's been so long.
It's a tricky game we play.
Yeah, you're out of the game, dude. Like you've been out of the game way too long.
I'm rusty.
Yeah.
I would like to make a joke about what Uncle Dan's about to do, but I have even though he told us what it is.
Well, I'll tell you what, Doug. If you just relax and listen to my voice, I may be able to retrieve the joke that you were going to make.
Oh, please.
Yeah. So relax and imagine a little spiraling thingamajig in front of you.
Okay.
Yeah. Dan, now that I've prepared him,
Yeah.
you get in there, and this is, guys, we're doing Inception.
So where do I input my credit card number?
just text it to me. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Listen, Uncle Doug, I don't know if you'll remember this, but back in episode 139, that was back in May of this year, so 400 years ago, Uncle Doug, you dug into the business training turned sex cult Nixium, or Nexium, as they call it.
Yeah.
It was such an interesting segment that months later, both HBO and Starz released documentary series about them. So,
That's right. You're
well
welcome.
done, Doug. We
Thank
scooped
you.
them.
Yep.
That's right. You heard it here first.
Yeah, exactly. If you've watched HBO's The Vow or Starz' Seduced, you know that they both rightly focus on the head creep in charge, sociopath rapist, and goblin-sized volleyball enthusiast Keith Raniere. We now know even more about that monster, and spoiler alert, last month he was sentenced to 120 years in prison. So,
Hooray!
Can you imagine what
riddance.
it's going to be like for him coming out of prison that old? To be like 165.
yeah.
That's
More
tough,
than
man.
that. He'll be 180 by then.
I hope they have some good vocational training for future jobs when he gets out.
Yeah, maybe they'll let him off in 100 years for good behavior.
Probably. I don't see good behavior as in his physiognomy.
Right, exactly. Well, here's the thing. We hear plenty about Raniere, but we hear a lot less about Nancy Saltzman, the co-founder of the group and prefect to Raniere's vanguard.
Yeah.
As I watched the two series, I became more and more intrigued by Saltzman. Here's a nice-seeming middle-aged woman with an infectious smile who is positively revered by the Nexium members. But what did I know about her? After watching hours of fascinating documentary about the cult she helped start, I still knew almost nothing. One thing that did keep popping up, though, was that they kept mentioning that she was trained in hypnosis and something called NLP. That seemed like it might be worth investigating, so down the rabbit hole I went. And the thing is, this is the kind of rabbit hole that takes some of your own digging to figure out what's really going on. But I'll give you the broad strokes first. NLP stands, in this case, for neuro-linguistic programming. I say in this case because, confusingly, NLP can also stand for natural language processing, which sounds crazily similar, but is in fact all about computers understanding human language better and has nothing to do with the other NLP, so forget it. That was a solid 20 minutes of my
You're never going to get back.
Our NLP was invented by Richard Bandler and John Grinder, and before he was kicked out of the band, a guy named Frank Pusilek. Now, you'd think that getting together guys named Bandler, Pusilek, and Grinder could only result in the dirtiest of hookup apps. But this was, in fact, the 1970s, so the tech just wasn't there
Imagine
yet.
going through high school as a Pusilek.
Right?
No, exactly.
Grinder and Pusilek.
I knew a girl whose last name was Skanky, and that was bad enough.
Wow.
True story. Yeah, true story.
Wow. Some families just need to change the family name.
Yeah.
Just give up. Anyway, instead of the hookup app, what they came up with was a system of modeling cognitive behavioral patterns in an attempt to create a new form of psychotherapy. Now, NLP centers on the idea that there's a link between your brain and your neurological function and language, and that somehow you can manipulate your language behavior to fix your psychological issues. So everything in NLP seems to do with the word model. This was all about modeling. Here's a real single sentence from the Wikipedia page about NLP. It's talking about a woman named Virginia Satir, whose work, along with a whole bunch of other people's, was very influential on these guys. Quote, Bandler and Grinder say that they used their own process of modeling to model Virginia Satir so that they could produce what they termed the meta model, a model for gathering information and challenging a client's language and underlying thinking. So, modeling. The idea seemed to be that you could take the patient's story about themselves and analyze the language of it to therapeutic effect. By calling out distortions, making general statements specific, and filling in gaps, you could fully flesh out what was really happening in a person's mind and thereby get at the heart of matters. Okay, I guess. Then they started working with the ideas of a guy named Milton Erickson, who worked in therapeutic hypnosis. They incorporated hypnotic language into their methodology to induce a trance state. This was meant to open the patient to the therapist's suggestion. What seems to have happened is that Bandler and Grinder read a bunch of theories
Sorry,
from
the
a
name's
huge...
just still getting it.
You're just going to have to get over it.
Yeah.
I could switch it, Grinder and Bandler, but I don't think it makes it. I don't think it makes it any better.
Still a shitty law firm anyway. You cut it.
Or a sexy one.
Yeah.
Anyway, they read a bunch of theories from a huge swath of different people, including, interestingly, Noam Chomsky, among myriad others, and cobbled them together into a kind of Franken method. Much of what they used wasn't proven effective or even scientific. The Chomsky that they drew from, for example, was linguistic theory and philosophy, and never meant to be used as a therapy. But that's okay, because Bandler and Grinder seem to have just stolen some of his terminology without really understanding what he was getting at anyway. That seems to have been a pattern with these guys. What they ended up with was a mishmash of ideas and language. A new age self-help gumbo that bounced off concepts like psychology, linguistics, mathematics, logic, like a ball in a pinball machine, creating a sciencey sounding theory that, when tested and analyzed, never showed any significant ability to help people. Here's a quote from Bandler himself talking about creating NLP. NLP is based on finding out what works and formalizing it. In order to formalize patterns, I used everything from linguistics to holography. The models that constitute NLP are all formal models based on mathematical, logical principles such as predicate calculus and the mathematical equations underlying holography. That's right. Holography. As in holograms. You know those three-dimensional pictures? That's part of the therapy, I guess. What expertise in holography did either of them have? None. But that doesn't matter. They wanted to not be experts. They were mavericks. They were trying to overthrow the current paradigm. Grinder talking about the work of Thomas Kuhn, who he apparently misinterpreted to mean that scientists who created the biggest waves in history were the ones who weren't part of the field they revolutionized. I guess because they weren't indoctrinated into the orthodoxy of that field. Here's what he said. I believe it was very useful that neither one of us were qualified in the field we first went after. Psychology, and in particular its therapeutic application. This being one of the conditions which Kuhn identified in his historical study of paradigm shifts. Well, it turns out that psychology, while still in its infancy in the 70s, wasn't in need of a dramatic shift in paradigm, and NLP was eventually largely abandoned by psychological professionals. But while it may have been kicked out of the major league, don't worry, there was a very eager minor league for NLP to take by storm. The self-help Woo Patrol took up the banner and ran with it. Most famously, enormous mouth with human attached Tony Robbins, trained with Grinder and incorporated some NLP ideas into his own motivational speaking / coaching business.
He's done, right? Like, didn't something happen with him? Didn't he
Oh, I don't think he's done. I mean, lots of things have happened. I think he's been accused of some stuff, but I think he's still going. I think. I'm not.
Well, he's
100%
really
sure.
motivated. You got to give him that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, having a net worth of over $500 million will do that to
And
you.
being 11 feet tall. He's the Home Depot 12-foot skeleton. That
Yes,
was modeled
indeed.
on him.
Yeah. Eventually, after a huge amount of bitter litigation between Bandler and Grinder, the courts decided that NLP was a generic concept and nobody owned it. This led to a bonanza. Anybody could take the concepts and modify them, add to them, teach them, employ them. There were and are no established best practices. Because this was outside of mainstream therapeutic science, there was no governing body to call anyone out. Organizations have arisen, of course, but there are no official accreditations or credentials needed to practice NLP.
It's the psychological version of a Fedra. It just cannot be brought to heel in any way, right?
Yeah, exactly. There is, for instance, a British Board of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, but gaining membership is not exactly difficult, as one TV presenter discovered when he was able to gain acceptance for his cat.
No way.
So, what does it do, according to practitioners? Well, the big claims are that NLP can help you, quote, transform your life. Want to break a habit? NLP. Want to succeed in business? NLP. Afraid of bees? NLP. Have AIDS? NLP.
No.
Well, the medical claims are more rare, but this is woo, so you know that sooner or later someone's going to start claiming that it'll fix your sciatica or cure your cancer, and they have done. And then there's the claim that I kept running into. Want to be a better salesperson? NLP will get you there. Now, in a woo that talks about boosting self-confidence, one might be tempted to gloss over this idea of improving salesmanship. But this had a different feel to it. It wasn't just about establishing rapport or dealing with rejection. They seemed to have something different up their sleeve, but in my research, I was really having trouble putting my finger on what I was picking up on. Everything was just so vague, unless I wanted to pay the $40 to take the course.
Of course.
It was a little nagging feeling that I had, that there was something I didn't understand, and that's what led me to what seems like the darker side of NLP. With its incorporation of hypnosis techniques, it seems that that part of what NLP teaches are advanced methods of manipulating people. Ways of using your language and behavior and monitoring other people's language and behavior so that you'll have an advantage over them. These concepts were developed to be used by therapists to help them understand their clients and dig deep into their subconscious to place positive, helpful suggestions. But therapists are bound by an ethical code. Doofuses who learned NLP from a guy at a meeting room in a local La Quinta aren't. Now, it's unclear to me how effective these techniques are in the real world. If the therapy can't be shown to be useful, you'd think that it wouldn't be an effective tool for nefarious purposes either. But I'm not sure about that. This isn't something that has been well studied. Most of NLP is about, helping people with anxiety or identifying limiting beliefs, really standard self-help stuff. But then I would listen to a podcast where two NLP trainers were talking about getting a company to let them train people in the company, and they started talking about how it's best not to mention NLP by name. To just say that it's leadership training or training to overcome the fear of public speaking. Or they're talking excitedly about how one of them, quote, hypnotized a whole room of executives in a training, and how great that was. But they would never say that they were going to hypnotize them. They would just say it was a relaxation exercise. These seemed like decent, well-meaning folks who really were just excited about trying to help other people, but There was an insane ethical problem there, and they didn't seem remotely aware of that. Imagine then if they weren't decent, well-meaning folks.
Yeah.
There's nobody guiding this ship. Is it possible that then some of the most manipulative aspects of NLP can be used unethically to push someone to buy something that they don't want or can't afford? Could it be used to trap the psyche of vulnerable people? I genuinely don't have the answer to that. What I do know is that when you combine an NLP-trained Nancy Saltzman with an ambitious sociopath like Keith Raniere, it doesn't take long before thousands of people are turning over gobs of money and giving up years of their life for the privilege to hear woo talk that amounts to little more than you're in charge of your own destiny.
Yeah, and generally high-functioning, intelligent women going, yeah, cool, let's brand me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, this is one of those things where I don't have answers for if it could truly be used for evil. I have some answers about like how effective it can be for good, which is not very, but it does seem like there's a danger there. And so that's, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, anytime that you have to mask the purpose and the name of the therapy you're giving, that's not a good sign.
No, it seems super deeply problematic.
Yeah,
and when I heard that,
you're not dealing in good faith with your client who you are purporting to help.
right, exactly. And these are two people talking on a podcast about NLP and about their exciting, all the inroads that they've made, all the ways that they've helped so many people, and they're so excited about it, and they're just completely missing the fact that if what you're doing is good, you don't have to lie about it to the people you're doing it to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable with the whole thing. I am going to take the training though, because I eventually want you guys to give up your share of the Patreon money. So we'll see how that goes. I'll let you know.
I don't know. You can just have it because I think it's pretty hard to divide a penny three ways. I'm kidding, patrons. We love you.
So there you go. Huh. Let's leave it in that uncomfortable space and move on.
Let's move on.